The deafening crack of her father's hand against the dining table silenced the room, but Jessamine Moore remained standing, her chin lifted in defiance even as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. The year was 1873, and in the small town of Copper Creek, Colorado, a woman's duty was clear: marry well and obey her father's wishes. "You will marry Judge Harding by the end of the month, Jessamine," Henry Moore declared, his voice cold as the mountain streams. "He's 54 years of fortune and status, which is more than this family has seen in years." Jessamine clutched the back of her chair, knuckles white against the dark wood. At 20 years old, she had watched her two older sisters married off to men of her father's, choosing men who had dulled the light in their eyes and bent their spirits. Judge Walter Harding was worse than both of them combined. His previous two wives had died under circumstances the town whispered about but never questioned openly. "I would sooner die than marry that man," Jessamine said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the thundering of her heart. His hands shake with drink by noon, and his eyes follow every woman in town like a hungry wolf. Her mother gasped, hand flying to her throat. "Jessamine, you will not speak of the judge that way." "It's the truth," Jessamine cried. "Everyone knows it, but no one says it." Her father rose from his chair, towering over the table. Henry Moore had once been a respected merchant, but poor investments and the recent economic panic had left him desperate for connections. "This isn't about love, girl. This is about survival. Judge Harding's position can save this family." Jessamine shook her head, golden brown curls escaping from her pins. "I won't be sold to pay your debts, father. I won't." The slap came faster than she could react, stinging her cheek and sending her stumbling backward. Her younger brother Timothy half rose from his chair before their mother's restraining hand pulled him back down. "You have until morning to come to your senses," her father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Either agree to the marriage, or leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. You'll be dead or worse within a week, and then perhaps you'll wish you'd listened." Jessamine fled to her room, the taste of blood sharp on her lip where she'd bitten it. Through the night, she packed what little she could carry: her mother's locket, a small book of poetry, a change of clothes, and the meager savings she'd hidden away from her work at the town's millinery shop. Dawn hadn't yet broken when she slipped out the back door, her heart fracturing with each step away from the only home she'd ever known. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, she was trudging along the dusty road that led west out of town, unsure where to go but certain she couldn't stay. The distant whistle of a train mocked her. She didn't have enough money for a ticket to anywhere worth going. The spring morning was cool, but Jessamine knew the Colorado sun would soon make her regret her heavy skirts and the thin shawl that was her only protection. The sound of hoofbeats made her tense. No one decent would be out on this road so early, and she was all too aware of the dangers that faced a woman alone. Jessamine quickened her pace, veering toward a stand of cottonwoods that might offer some cover. "Miss, hold up there." The male voice was deep but not threatening. Still, Jessamine didn't slow down. A horse and rider appeared in her peripheral vision, keeping pace with her hurried steps. "Miss Moore? Jessamine Moore?" The rider slowed his horse to a walk. "Are you all right? You're bleeding." Jessamine touched her lip, surprised to find it still swollen from the night before. She stopped and turned to face the rider, ready to run if necessary. What she saw was a young man perhaps a few years older than herself, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was too long for town fashion, and his clothes were those of a working man, a rancher, or cowboy. "Do I know you?" she asked cautiously. He touched the brim of his hat. "Mason Reed. I work the box our ranch about 10 miles west of here." He studied her face with concern. "I was in town picking up supplies yesterday when I overheard some talk at the general store. About Judge Harding and a wedding. Your father seemed mighty insistent." Jessamine's cheeks burned with humiliation. "So the whole town knows." Mason Reed shrugged. Small towns have big ears. But that's not why I stopped. Are you running away? I was given a choice: marry Judge Harding or leave. I chose to leave. She lifted her chin, daring him to judge her. To her surprise, Mason nodded. Good choice. Harding's not fit to marry anyone, least of all someone like you. Someone like me? Someone young, with spirit. His eyes held hers for a moment before he looked away, scanning the horizon. Your father will come looking. Or send the sheriff. Jessamine's stomach twisted with fear. She hadn't thought beyond escaping. I don't have anywhere to go. Mason Reed was quiet for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Then he extended his hand down to her. I can take you to the box. Mrs. Reynolds, the ranch owner's wife, has been looking for help with the house and the cooking. They're good people. Jessamine stared at his hand, then at his face. Taking a stranger's offer could lead to something worse than Judge Harding, but something in Mason Reed's steady gaze made her want to trust him. Why would you help me? She asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My sister married a man like Harding. She didn't have anyone to offer her another choice. Jessamine took a deep breath and made her decision. She placed her hand in his, gasping slightly as his strong grip lifted her easily. In one fluid motion, she found herself seated sideways in front of him on the saddle, her small bag clutched to her chest. Hold on, he said, his voice close to her ear as he nudged the horse into motion. It's a long ride to the Boxar. As they rode away from Copper Creek, Jessamine felt a peculiar mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was leaving behind everything familiar, riding off with a man she'd just met, to a place she'd never seen. Yet somehow, with the solid warmth of Mason Reed behind her and the rhythm of the horse beneath them, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. The Boxar Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley nestled between rolling hills. By the time they arrived, the sun was high overhead, and Jessamine's legs ached from the long ride. A cluster of buildings formed the heart of the ranch, a main house larger than she'd expected, a bunkhouse, stables, and various outbuildings. Men moved about their business, some pausing to watch as Mason Reed rode in with a woman in front of him. That's unusual, even for you, Reed, called a grizzled older man as they approached the main house. This is Miss Moore, Mason replied, dismounting before helping Jessamine down. Her legs nearly buckled when they touched the ground. She needs work and a safe place. Is Mrs. Reynolds around? The older man eyed Jessamine skeptically, taking in her town clothes and the fading mark on her face. In the kitchen, most likely, getting ready to feed this hungry lot. Mason guided Jessamine toward the house with a gentle hand at her elbow. Don't mind Jacob. He's suspicious of everyone until they prove they can work. Inside, the house was surprisingly cool and well-appointed. A plump woman with silver-streaked dark hair looked up from a massive stove as they entered the kitchen. Her assessing gaze took in Jessamine's disheveled appearance and the protective way Mason stood beside her. Martha Reynolds, the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. And you would be? Jessamine Moore, madam. She tried to stand straight despite her exhaustion. Mr. Reed said you might be looking for help. Martha's eyes flicked to Mason, who gave a slight nod. Did he now? And what can you do, Miss Moore? I can cook, clean, sew. I worked in the millinery shop in Copper Creek for 3 years. Jessamine swallowed hard. I'm a quick learner, madam. Martha circled Jessamine, noting her fine hands and the quality of her dress beneath the dust of travel. Running from something, I take it? Jessamine stiffened. Someone, madam. My father arranged a marriage to Judge Harding. Understanding dawned in Martha's eyes. Walter Harding? That old lecher? She crossed her arms. 2 wives in the ground already, and both before their time. Yes, madam. Martha nodded decisively. We can use the help. 30 women to 100 men in these parts, and most won't come out to a ranch to work. Room and board plus $2 a week. Sundays off unless there's an emergency. Relief washed over Jessamine. Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. I accept. Good. Mason, show her to the small room off the back porch. Then let her rest until supper. Martha turned back to her stove. After she's eaten, we'll talk about her duties. Mason led Jessamine through the house to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A window looked out over a kitchen garden and, beyond it, the vast expanse of ranch land. It's not much, he said apologetically. It's perfect, Jessamine replied, overcome with gratitude. Mr. Reed, I don't know how to thank you. Mason, he corrected with a small smile. And there's no need for thanks. Just be careful around here. Most of the men are decent, but not all of them. He hesitated at the door. I'll come by at supper to check on you. After he left, Jessamine sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she'd done. She'd left her family, perhaps forever. She was alone at a strange ranch, dependent on the kindness of strangers. And yet, as she looked out at the mountains in the distance, she felt a curious lightness. For the first time in her life, she had made her own choice. The following weeks passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Jessamine's town-bred hands blistered and cracked from washing endless dishes and scrubbing floors, but she never complained. She learned to cook for large groups under Martha's watchful eye, to manage the household inventories, and to deal with the curious, sometimes too friendly ranch hands who found excuses to visit the main house. Mason Reed kept his distance, though she often felt his eyes on her when he came in for meals with the other men. Unlike some of the cowboys, he never made suggestive comments or tried to corner her alone. In fact, he barely spoke to her at all, which Jessamine found oddly disappointing. One evening, as she was hanging laundry in the golden light of dusk, she heard a horse approach. Looking up, she saw Mason dismounting nearby, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. "Evening, Miss Moore," he said, removing his hat. "Need some help?" Jessamine blinked in surprise. "I can manage, thank you." He nodded but didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the fence post, watching her work. The silence stretched between them until Jessamine could bear it no longer. "Is there something you wanted, Mr. Reed?" "Mason," he reminded her softly. "And yes, I wanted to ask how you're settling in." She pinned the last sheet to the line. "Well enough. Mrs. Reynolds is fair and the work is honest. And the men? Anyone bothering you?" Jessamine thought of Tom Wilson, one of the younger hands who had tried to kiss her in the pantry last week, and Pete Harris, who always found reasons to brush against her. "Nothing I can't handle." Mason's expression darkened. "That's not an answer, Miss Moore." "Jessamine," she corrected, surprising herself. "And it's the only answer you're getting. I don't need a protector, Mr. Reed. Everyone needs someone watching their back out here." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him. "Especially someone who doesn't know the dangers." Jessamine felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear. "I'm learning quickly. I've noticed." His smile was unexpected and transformed his serious face. "Mrs. Reynolds says you're the best help she's had in years." Pride warmed Jessamine's cheeks. "She's a good teacher." "Sunday's your day off, isn't it?" When she nodded, he continued, "There's a spot about an hour's ride from here. A small lake with a view of the mountains. I thought you might like to see something beyond the ranch yard." Jessamine's heart skipped. Was this an innocent offer or something more? "I don't ride," she admitted. "I could teach you." "Or—" He hesitated. "You could ride with me." The memory of their journey to the ranch flashed through her mind, the solid warmth of him behind her, the strange intimacy of sharing a saddle. "I'd like that," she said before she could reconsider. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Jessamine dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Martha provided a basket with bread, cheese, and apples for their midday meal, her knowing smile making Jessamine blush. "Mason's a good man," Martha said as she handed over the basket. "Steady. Not like some of these wild boys." "It's just an outing, Mrs. Reynolds," Jessamine protested. "Of course it is," Martha replied, unconvinced. "Just be back before dark. Mr. Reynolds doesn't like anyone out after nightfall, not with the Larson gang causing trouble to the north." Mason was waiting by the stables, his horse saddled and ready. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his hair, Jessamine noticed with a little thrill. He helped her up, then mounted behind her, his arms creating a secure circle as he took the reins. They rode in companionable silence, the beauty of the landscape making conversation unnecessary. The small lake, when they reached it, was even more spectacular than Mason had described, crystal-clear water reflecting the snow-capped peaks beyond. "It's beautiful," Jessamine breathed as Mason helped her down. "I come here to think," he said, spreading a blanket on a grassy spot near the shore. "Not many know about this place." They ate their simple lunch and talked for the first time. Mason told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, losing his parents to fever when he was 16, and working his way west with his sister. "Where is she now?" Jessamine asked. A shadow crossed his face. "St. Louis. Her husband doesn't allow letters anymore." Jessamine touched his hand briefly. "I'm sorry." He turned his palm up, catching her fingers in his. "That's why I stopped that morning. You reminded me of her same determination in your eyes." The touch of his hand sent warmth spiraling through her. "I wasn't very determined. Just desperate. Desperate enough to climb on a horse with a stranger," he said with a wry smile. "That takes courage." "Or foolishness," she countered. "Maybe a bit of both." His fingers tightened around hers. "I'm glad you did, though." They spent the afternoon exploring the shoreline, skipping stones across the glassy surface, and talking about everything and nothing. By the time they headed back to the ranch, something had shifted between them, a current of awareness that made the ride home both exquisite and torturous, with Mason's arms around her and his breath occasionally warming her neck. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a pattern. Sundays became their day, with Mason teaching Jessamine to ride on a gentle mare named Buttercup. They explored the ranch lands, picnicked by streams, and once rode to a small trading post where Mason bought her a ribbon for her hair, a deep blue that matched his eyes. Their friendship blossomed slowly into something more, though neither put it into words. A brush of hands while passing the salt at dinner. A lingering gaze across the yard. The way Mason always seemed to know when Jessamine needed help carrying water or moving heavy pots. It was Martha who finally spoke the obvious. "That boy's in love with you," she said bluntly one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. Jessamine nearly dropped the plate she was drying. "Mrs. Reynolds." "Oh, don't act surprised. Everyone with eyes can see it." Martha scrubbed vigorously at a pot. "Question is, what do you plan to do about it?" "I don't. We haven't." Jessamine stammered. "Men like Mason don't come along every day," Martha continued. "Especially not out here. He's honest, hardworking, and looks at you like you hung the moon." Heat flooded Jessamine's face. "I've only known him 3 months. Time doesn't matter much when it's right." Martha rinsed the pot and handed it over. "My husband proposed after 2 weeks. We've been married 26 years now." Jessamine bit her lip. "I ran away to avoid a marriage I didn't want. I'm not sure I'm ready to consider another." Martha's expression softened. "There's a world of difference between being sold to an old man and choosing a partner for yourself, girl. Just think on it." Jessamine did think about it, especially when Mason's hand would brush hers, or when she caught him watching her with that intense gaze that made her insides melt. She thought about it at night in her narrow bed, remembering the feel of his arms around her as they rode, wondering what it would be like if he kissed her. But just as she was beginning to acknowledge her feelings, trouble arrived at the Box R. It was a Tuesday when Sheriff Daniels rode up to the main house, his expression grim as he asked for Mr. Reynolds. Jessamine, who was hanging laundry nearby, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She hadn't told anyone at the ranch except Martha and Mason the full story of why she'd left Copper Creek, and she'd been careful to stay away from the main house when visitors came. Through the open window, she could hear the sheriff's voice. Looking for a young woman, Jessamine Moore. Her father says she ran off to avoid her responsibilities. Judge Harding is mighty upset about the whole affair. Mr. Reynolds' reply was too low to hear, but the sheriff continued. Description matches one of your house girls, from what I hear in town. Golden brown hair, blue eyes, about 20 years old. Jessamine's heart pounded. She abandoned the laundry and slipped around to the back of the house, entering through the kitchen where Martha was kneading bread. Sheriff's here, Jessamine whispered, her voice tight with panic. Looking for me. Martha's hands stilled in the dough. Did he see you? No, but he described me to Mr. Reynolds. Martha wiped her hands and moved quickly to the door, locking it. Go to your room. Pack what you need. I'll send Mason to you as soon as he comes in. But I can't just leave. You can and you will. Martha's voice was firm. Judge Harding has friends in high places. If he wants you back badly enough, he could make trouble for anyone harboring you. Tears burned Jessamine's eyes. I don't want to bring trouble to you and Mr. Reynolds. You've been so kind. Kindness isn't something that needs repaying, child. Martha squeezed her shoulder. Now go. Quickly. In her room, Jessamine threw her few possessions into the same bag she'd carried from Copper Creek. Through her window, she saw the sheriff mounting his horse, Mr. Reynolds standing on the porch watching him go. She couldn't read Mr. Reynolds' expression from this distance, but his stiff posture suggested anger. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Jessamine? It's Mason. She opened the door, relief washing over her at the sight of him. The sheriff, I know. I passed him on my way in. Mason's eyes were dark with concern. Mr. Reynolds told me. We need to get you away from here, at least until things cool down. Where would I go? The prospect of starting over again alone made Jessamine's throat tighten. Mason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of deep thought. I have a place. A small cabin about 20 miles north of here in the foothills. I've been building it on my days off. Building it? Why? Every cowboy dreams of his own spread someday. He met her eyes steadily. I've been saving for years. Bought the land last winter. It's not much, but it's mine. Understanding dawned slowly. You're leaving the Boxar? Not right away, but eventually. He took a deep breath. I'd plan to show you next Sunday. Ask you. Well, that doesn't matter now. The point is, you'd be safe there while we figure this out. Jessamine's heart fluttered at what he'd almost said. We. Mason stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek. I'm not letting you face this alone, Jessamine. Not unless you want me to. The tenderness in his touch broke something open inside her. I don't want to be alone, she whispered. Especially not without you. His expression transformed, hope and something deeper lighting his eyes. Then let's go. Now, before the sheriff decides to come back with reinforcements. Within the hour, they were riding north, Jessamine on Buttercup and Mason on his stallion, Storm. Martha had packed them enough food for several days and pressed a small pouch of coins into Jessamine's hand. Mr. Reynolds said to tell you he'll handle the sheriff if he returns, Martha said as they prepared to leave. And Mason take care of her. With my life, Mason promised, his voice solemn. They rode hard until dusk, then made camp in a sheltered hollow. Mason built a small fire and laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of it, ever mindful of propriety despite their circumstances. Will you tell me about your cabin? Jessamine asked as they ate the stew Martha had packed. Mason's face softened in the firelight. It's simple. 2 rooms, with a view of the valley. Good water from a spring nearby. Land enough for a small herd to start, and room to grow. He poked at the fire. I've been working on it for months, whenever I could get away. It sounds wonderful, Jessamine said honestly. It needs a woman's touch, he admitted. But it's a start. They reached the cabin late the next day. True to Mason's word, it was simple, a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney, set on a gentle slope overlooking a picturesque valley. Inside was basic but sound, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a fireplace, and a smaller room with a bed frame Mason had crafted himself. You'll take the bedroom, he said as he showed her around. I'll sleep by the fire. Jessamine explored the cabin while Mason tended to the horses. Despite its rustic nature, she could see the care he'd put into every detail: the smooth, plain surfaces, the tight-fitting logs, the windows positioned to catch both morning and evening light. You've created something special here, she told him when he returned. It's still rough, he said, but pleasure at her approval was evident in his smile. They fell into a strange domestic rhythm over the next few days. Mason hunted and chopped wood while Jessamine cooked and tried to make the cabin more comfortable with what little they had. In the evenings, they talked by the fire, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing night. On the 4th evening, as an autumn storm rattled the windows, Mason finally asked the question that had been building between them. What happens when this is over, Jessamine? When it's safe for you to show your face again? She looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of his that had torn during their flight. I don't know. I can't go back to Copper Creek. And the box are? His voice was carefully neutral. Jessamine said aside her sewing. I was happy there. But I've been happier here, she admitted softly. Even with the danger and uncertainty. Being here with you. Mason moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. I'm not a wealthy man, Jessamine. I can't offer you fine things or an easy life. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it. Tears filled her eyes. Are you asking me to marry you, Mason Reed? I'm asking you to build a life with me. His hands tightened on hers. To make this cabin a home. To face whatever comes, good or bad, together. Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and overwhelming. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. The kiss that followed was everything Jessamine had imagined in her solitary nights, tender at first, then deepening with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, Mason pressed his forehead to hers, his breathing as unsteady as her own. I've wanted to do that since the day I found you on that road, he confessed. Jessamine smiled. What took you so long? Their happiness, however, was short-lived. The next morning, the sound of approaching horses jolted them from sleep. Mason peered out the window, his expression hardening. 3 riders. One's the sheriff. He turned to Jessamine, his voice urgent. Stay inside. No matter what happens, stay inside. Mason no, but he was already buckling on his gun belt and heading for the door. Jessamine watched through the window as he stepped onto the porch, standing tall and unafraid as the riders approached. Sheriff Daniels reined in his horse, 2 men flanking him, one Jessamine recognized with a shock of fear as Judge Harding himself, the other a deputy she didn't know. Mason Reed, the sheriff called. We've come for the Moore girl. Her father's pressing charges for stolen property she took when she left. There's no one here by that name, Mason replied evenly. Judge Harding spurred his horse forward. Don't play games, boy. We know she's here. The Reynolds told us everything after we explained the seriousness of harboring a thief. Jessamine's blood ran cold. Martha and Mr. Reynolds would never betray her willingly. What had these men done? The lady took nothing that wasn't hers, Mason said, his stance widening slightly. And she's under my protection now. The judge's face mottled with anger. She's promised to me a legal contract with her father. A woman isn't property to be traded, Mason shot back. And Jessamine Moore is a free woman who makes her own choices. The judge dismounted, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Step aside, cowboy, or I'll have the sheriff arrest you for interfering with the law. Jessamine couldn't bear it any longer. She threw open the door and stepped onto the porch beside Mason. I'm here, she called. But I'm not going anywhere with you, Judge Harding. Jessamine, Mason hissed, trying to push her behind him. She stood firm.
No.
I won't hide while you face them for me. The judge's face twisted into an ugly smile. There's my wayward bride. Your father is quite disappointed in you, young lady. My father sold me to cover his debts, Jessamine replied coldly. I owe him nothing. You took your mother's locket, the judge countered. Family heirloom, quite valuable. That's theft. It was my grandmother's gift to me on my 16th birthday. Jessamine touched the locket at her throat. And even if it wasn't, it wouldn't justify forcing me into marriage. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Judge, if the girl doesn't want to come. She's barely more than a child, Harding snapped. She doesn't know what's best for her. I'm 20 years old, Jessamine said firmly. Old enough to know I'd rather die than be her wife. The judge's face darkened. That can be arranged. In one swift motion, he drew his pistol and aimed it at Jessamine. Everything happened at once. Mason shoved Jessamine aside as the gun fired. She stumbled, falling hard against the porch railing as Mason's own weapon cleared its holster. 2 more shots rang out in quick succession. When Jessamine regained her footing, Judge Harding was on the ground, blood blooming across his chest. Mason stood with his gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. The sheriff and his deputy had both drawn their weapons, creating a frozen tableau of potential violence. He fired first, the deputy said, breaking the tense silence. We all saw it. The sheriff slowly lowered his gun. Man draws on an unarmed woman. He gets what's coming to him. He glanced at his deputy. Wouldn't you say, Jim? The deputy nodded. Clear case of self-defense, Sheriff. Relief flooded through Jessamine until she turned to Mason and saw the dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. You're hit. It's nothing, he said, though his face had gone pale beneath his tan. Grazed me. It was more than a graze. Once they got his shirt off inside the cabin, Jessamine could see the bullet had torn a deep furrow across his upper arm. Using skills learned from her mother, who had often tended injuries in their frontier town, she cleaned and bandaged the wound while the sheriff and his deputy dealt with Judge Harding's body. You could have been killed, she said, her hands trembling as she tied off the bandage. Mason caught her wrist. But I wasn't. And neither were you. The sheriff appeared in the doorway, his expression somber. Judge is dead. We'll take the body back to town. He studied Mason for a long moment. No charges will be filed. Self-defense, like Jim said. And Jessamine? Mason asked, his good hand still wrapped around her wrist. Far as I'm concerned, this matter's closed. The sheriff shifted his weight. But you might want to make things proper if you two are planning to stay together. Stop any further talk. After the lawmen departed with Harding's body, Jessamine and Mason sat in silence, the reality of what had happened settling over them. I never wanted anyone to die, Jessamine finally said. Neither did I. Mason winced as he adjusted his position. But he would have killed you without a second thought. What happens now? Mason looked at her, his eyes serious. That depends on you. The sheriff was right about one thing: we should make this proper. Not because of what people might say, but because it's what I want. What I hope you want too. Despite the trauma of the morning, Jessamine felt a smile touch her lips. Are you asking me again, Mason Reed? I'm asking you to marry me. Today, tomorrow, whenever you're ready. But soon. His uninjured hand came up to touch her cheek. Life's too uncertain to wait for perfect moments. 3 days later, With Mason's arm in a sling and Jessamine wearing a dress Martha had quickly altered for her, they stood before a preacher in the small church in Bear Creek, the nearest town to their cabin. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds stood as witnesses, their presence a balm after the fear that they had been harmed by the judge and his men. "They threatened to arrest Mr. Reynolds for harboring you," Martha explained before the ceremony. "But they never laid a hand on us. We told them nothing. They must have followed Mason on one of his trips to the cabin." The ceremony was simple but meaningful, Jessamine's heart full to bursting as she promised herself to the man who had quite literally saved her life twice over. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mason's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a promise of all the days and nights to come. They returned to their cabin that evening as Mr. and Mrs. Reed, the autumn sunset painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Mason insisted on carrying Jessamine over the threshold despite his injury, nearly sending them both tumbling when his foot caught on the doorframe. Their laughter echoed in the small cabin as he set her down, his good arm still around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed." "Home," Jessamine repeated, the words sweet on her tongue. "I never thought I'd find one again after I left Copper Creek." "You'll never have to leave this one," Mason promised. "Not unless we choose to." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in ways both tender and passionate. Jessamine's fears about her inexperience melted away under Mason's patient guidance, and by dawn, she understood the mysterious smiles the married women in town had always shared when speaking of their husbands. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side to prepare the cabin and land for winter. Mason's wound healed cleanly, and his strength returned in time for the heavy work of stocking firewood and making final repairs to the roof and walls. Jessamine created curtains from fabric Martha brought on her visits, planted a small winter garden in a sheltered spot, and learned to cook on the temperamental fireplace. Word came from Copper Creek that her father had fallen ill, apparently devastated by the death of his powerful ally and the loss of any hope for financial rescue. Jessamine sent a brief letter through Martha, offering forgiveness, but making it clear she would not return. She never received a reply, but Martha reported that her mother and younger brother were managing the household now, and things were slowly improving. Winter arrived with a fury that surprised even Mason, blanketing their valley in snow so deep it reached the windowsills. They were snowed in for nearly 2 weeks in January, the isolation creating an intimacy that deepened their bond. They read to each other from Jessamine's book of poetry, played cards by lamplight, and made love in the golden glow of the fireplace, learning the landscape of each other's bodies until every sigh and shiver was familiar. It was during this snowbound period that Jessamine realized she was with child. The signs had been there: the missed monthly courses, the strange aversions to foods she normally enjoyed, the tenderness in her breasts, but she'd attributed them to the stress of their dramatic fall and the adjustment to married life. She told Mason one evening as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside their snug cabin. His reaction, pure joy followed by protective concern, confirmed everything she felt about the man she'd married. He held her gently, his hand splayed across her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes as he whispered plans and dreams for their growing family. Spring brought renewal to more than just the land. As the snow melted and the first wildflowers appeared on the hillsides, Jessamine's body blossomed with new life. Mason insisted on hiring help for the heavier ranch work, using some of the savings he'd accumulated over years of careful living. 2 young men from Bear Creek came to work with a small herd of cattle Mason had purchased, allowing him to stay closer to home as Jessamine's time approached. Their daughter, Martha Joy Reed, was born on a perfect June day in 1874, with Mrs. Reynolds assisting and Mason pacing anxiously outside until the first cry pierced the air. When he was finally allowed in, the sight of his exhausted wife cradling their tiny daughter reduced the strong cowboy to tears. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the downy head. "Just like her mother." Jessamine smiled up at him, tired but radiant. "She has your eyes, I think." "Poor child," Mason joked, but his expression was tender as he perched carefully on the edge of the bed. "Thank you for this gift, Jessamine. For everything." Life settled into a rhythm centered around little Martha's needs and the growing ranch. Mason proved to be as natural a father as he was a rancher, often wearing his daughter in a sling against his chest while he worked around the property. Jessamine found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she'd imagined, each day bringing new discoveries about the small person they'd created. By Martha's first birthday, the Box R Ranch had a new name, the Double R, and had expanded to include a proper barn, a bunkhouse for the now four hands they employed, and additional acreage purchased from a neighboring spread. Mason's careful management and Jessamine's thrifty housekeeping allowed them to reinvest most of their profits, slowly building the dream they'd shared on those early days in the cabin. When Martha was 18 months old, Jessamine discovered she was expecting again. The news came as they prepared for their second winter as a family. The cabin now expanded with 2 additional rooms to accommodate their growing needs. "Another baby," Mason marveled, his hand gently resting on her stomach as they lay in bed one night. "Do you think it's a boy this time?" "Perhaps," Jessamine smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Would you like that? A son to teach your ranching ways?" "I'd like a dozen of each," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "As long as they have your spirit and your smile." "A dozen might be excessive," she laughed. "But 2 is a wonderful start." Michael James Reed arrived in the depths of winter, a February blizzard raging outside, as Jessamine labored through the night. Larger than his sister had been, and with a shock of dark hair like his father's, he announced his presence with lusty cries that seemed to challenge the howling wind. "A strong boy," Martha Reynolds declared as she placed the swaddled infant in Mason's arms. "With a good set of lungs on him." Mason cradled his son with the same wonder he'd shown his daughter, his eyes meeting Jessamine's across the room. "We did good, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We did," she agreed, exhausted but fulfilled. "Though I think we might pause before working on the next 10 you mentioned." His laugh was warm as he brought their son to her. "However many, whenever they come, or if it's just these 2 perfect ones, I'm the luckiest man alive." As the years passed, the Double R flourished, becoming one of the most prosperous ranches in the region. Little Martha grew into a spirited girl with her mother's golden brown curls and her father's steady nature, while Michael developed into a serious, thoughtful boy who shadowed Mason's every move around the ranch. 2 more children joined their family, Emma Rose in 1877 and William Henry in 1880, completing what Jessamine considered their perfect family. Though ranching life was never easy, with droughts, harsh winters, and occasional trouble with rustlers, the foundation of love and mutual respect she and Mason had built proved strong enough to weather any challenge. On a warm summer evening in 1883, as they sat on the porch of their now substantial home watching their children play in the yard, Mason took Jessamine's hand in his thumb tracing the worn gold band he'd placed there a decade earlier. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Running away that day? Climbing onto a horse with a stranger?" Jessamine turned to study his face, still handsome though now lined by years of work in the Colorado sun. "Not for a single moment," she replied honestly. "It was the best decision I ever made." Mason smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "You know, I wasn't just passing by that morning. I'd seen you in town before, at the millinery shop. You were helping an older woman try on hats, and you laughed at something she said. I thought it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard." "You never told me that," Jessamine said, surprised. "I didn't want you to think I was some lovesick fool who'd been watching you," he admitted. "But when I heard about the judge's plans, I knew I had to do something. I rode out at dawn hoping to catch you before you left town." "My night on horseback," she teased gently, though her heart swelled with the revelation. "Hardly that," he laughed. "Just a cowboy who couldn't bear the thought of someone as bright as you being snuffed out by a man like Harding." Jessamine leaned against a shoulder, watching as 6-year-old Emma helped 3-year-old William build a tower of sticks while Martha and Michael argued good-naturedly over the rules of their game. "Sometimes the best journeys start with a desperate choice," she mused. "I was running away from something terrible, but in the end, I was really running toward everything I ever wanted." Mason pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And I'm grateful every day that your path ran right into mine." As twilight deepened over the Double R Ranch, Jessamine Reed looked out at the empire they had built together, not just the land and buildings, but the family that filled them with laughter and love. 10 years earlier, she had faced an impossible choice, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. That courage had led her not just to freedom, but to a love more profound than anything she could have imagined. The girl who had once been banished from her family for refusing a marriage had found her true home in the arms of a cowboy who had lifted her onto his horse and into a life filled with purpose, passion, and boundless love.